Now, not everybody that has a disability is going to need reasonable adjustments. If you've got asthma, for example, and that asthma is well controlled, you take pumps on a regular basis and rarely have any impact from it, it's unlikely you're going to need any reasonable adjustments at work. You still can't be treated less favourably, you can't be dismissed because of that asthma, but you may not need reasonable adjustments. There may be others who do need reasonable adjustments. And the definition of disability, as I say, is very wide in terms of what is a disability and therefore what adjustments might be needed. So I can't sit here and give you a list of what these are the reasonable adjustments that are considered, because it is far-reaching and wide, and it does depend on what is reasonable. This word reasonable is so important. And reasonable in one situation is not necessarily going to be reasonable in another situation. So when we're looking at reasonable adjustments, this is my process, my step-by-step guide to how we look at reasonable adjustments. So firstly, we look at, do they come under the definition of a disability? Because if they don't, then we don't even need to consider this. However, do bear in mind everything I said in the performance and the absent thing about providing the relevant supports to people to enable them to perform. Ultimately, if you can give someone a little support and they'll perform, why wouldn't you? It's going to be good for your business. But anyway, for this point, do they have a disability? Do they come under that definition? If they do, then we have got a duty to make reasonable adjustments. We have that duty as long as we reasonably know or could know that they have a disability. So do bear in mind that if you've heard it on the grapevine, then you know. If someone's got regular absence, this is why we should ask people, because it would be reasonable to know or think that there might be a disability there. If there's regular absence, it's really important that we ask people. So firstly, do they have that? Do they fit that definition of disability? And then the next thing to look at then is, what adjustments do they need to be able to perform? So if we need them performing here, let's assume they're here. And now, in some ways, that's going to be, let's say, dyslexia, for example. We may need them to write, I'm just going to go with a really simple, probably not very accurate, but kind of for the purposes of simplicity. We need them to read 10 documents a day. This person with dyslexia reads quite slowly, so they read 5 documents a day. And therefore there's this gap in performance. But if we were to provide them with a reader, an electronic reader system, they would be able to get through the 10 a day, right? So that's the reasonable adjustment. That takes us from this level to this level. If you've got somebody who can't get in the building because there's steps unless you build a ramp, then we're not looking at performance in terms of this in the same way. Okay, so we're looking at what's the circumstances here. What is it that they need to level the playing field? We need to list that, right? So it may well be there's a huge list. It may be that there's one thing and it's not a huge list. It may be that there's a few things, but what are the adjustments that they would need in order for them to be able to do the job at the level we need them to be doing it, in the way we need them to be doing it. And bear in mind, an adjustment could be to the way that we need it, or even actually to the level that we need it. That could be the adjustment that we make. But let's look at all of it, write it all down, put it all on a piece of paper. If we need to get occupational health, if we need to write to their consultant, whatever we need to do to establish. And for many people, they will have had, particularly somebody who's had a disability all their lives, they may well come to you and go, right, this is what I need. As long as I've got a ramp that I can get into the building, then I'm absolutely fine. Or they'll list off what it is that they need. They may say, oh, actually, can I use my own software? I've got this software that really helps me. They will know. We've got other people who, perhaps somebody who finds themselves in a situation where they suddenly become falling under that category of disability, and therefore they're trying to figure it out for themselves as well. Or we've got people, particularly with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, we're finding now, who have had this all their lives. They've always struggled with this thing, maybe have lost jobs for it in the past. Now they're realising that actually this is the diagnosis, this is what is causing the problems. Therefore starting to realise that there are supports that could be put in place, but perhaps not fully realising or knowing yet what those supports are, because the the conditions mean that different people need different supports, and therefore there's not like a dead straight list of saying, right, this is what you need. So it can be challenging to get that list, but fundamentally that's got to be where we start from, is that list. Even if we come back and review it and update it and change it later, but we need to start with that list. So we've got the definition of disability, we've got a list of the adjustments that they would need to be able to do the role, and then we ask the question, which of those are reasonable? And reasonable is fairly wide-reaching, so we can't just say, oh, it's not reasonable because it's going to cost us some money. It's got to cost us, the money side has got to be really unreasonable before we start saying, actually, no, we can't do that. And there are grants available for, government grants for people with disabilities to have adjustments that go beyond what would ordinarily be a reasonable adjustment. And that can even include things like ADHD coaches or admin support for ADHD. So it's quite wide in terms of government supports available. Access to Work is the grant, and it's worth looking that up if you've got somebody that needs some additional supports. So we're then looking at what's reasonable, and I would recommend that you take some advice because, as I say, it is quite far-reaching. We've got a lot of case law which tells us how tribunals have judged these in various different circumstances, and we can refer back to those to look at what would be considered reasonable. And then we put those reasonable adjustments in place. If they're not reasonable, we need to be able to justify why they're not reasonable, and potentially we could dismiss or not employ because there are not reasonable adjustments that we could put in place that would get somebody to where we need them to be. But we have to have gone through these steps of looking at what are the adjustments we need, which are reasonable, can we put them in, and then put them in place to try and get things to work. So looking first, what's the disability? What adjustments are needed? Forget the word reasonable. What adjustments are needed? Which of those are reasonable and we can put in place, and then put them in place. That's your steps to making reasonable adjustments. Whether you're looking at that through the recruitment process, offering a job role, through performance, through absence, whichever one, those are your steps to looking at reasonable adjustments. As I say, I do recommend taking advice as well. And there's also advice we can get, like occupational health reports, for example, which can also give us advice on how we can support people. Because even as HR professionals, we can't know every disability, everyone's condition. And it's also why we need to work directly with individuals to understand their particular circumstances, so that we're looking at them as an individual rather than their diagnosis or what we think somebody might need in place. Welcome to HR for non-HR managers. If you are a people manager, a business owner, or perhaps you work in HR and you're looking for a more practical application of employment law, then this course is absolutely for you. I'm going to take you through every step of the things you need to know to build up the foundations to be able to manage your team really effectively and keep your business safe. I've devised this course in a way that takes you through each of the foundational pieces as you need them and puts together the building blocks that you need. Look forward to seeing you throughout the course, and good luck.